So let me just begin with a brief welcome. So I'd like to welcome you all of you here who are with us, to the London School of Economics. Many of you here are here for the very first time, and we are delighted to be welcoming you here. The main objective of this conference is to mark the centenary of Babasaheb Ambedkar's PhD at LSE and celebrate this great stalwart whose contributions to sustainable development were multidisciplinary and multidimensional, and his legacy continues to influence and impact to this very day. We will be learning more about this over the course of this weekend, while also marking his Jayanti. To open this conference, we have with us the President and Vice Chancellor of LSE, Professor Larry Kramer.
Thank you, and welcome everybody. So I'm Larry Kramer. I'm the new President and Vice Chancellor here at LSE, and new like 1 week into the job, so genuinely new. But I'm really delighted to have this opportunity to welcome you all here and to say just a few words. I'm particularly grateful and welcome to be able to welcome Professor Kulkarni, who is with us online today, but will be here tomorrow, Vice Chancellor of the University of Mumbai, and Mr. Sujit Ghosh from the Indian High Commission. So being new to LSE, I'm learning more and more each day about the history and the community of the university. I knew a decent amount, or at least I thought I did, but it's been really eye-opening since I arrived to realize just how many remarkable people have passed through these halls, including a great many who played significant roles in the creation of the modern Indian state. My predecessor, Baroness Minouche Shafiq, used to say that while Oxford and Cambridge had trained the people who ran the empire, LSE trained the people who overthrew it. It's a good line, which in the familiar words of Henry Kissinger has the additional benefit of being true, and it's particularly so when it comes to the person we're here to honor today, B.R. Ambedkar. When people write or talk about LSE, they often focus on the many heads of state who've graduated from the university. There are actually 56 of them. And since Ambedkar never sat at the head of government, he's sometimes overlooked on other people's lists of LSE's foremost alumni. That's not true here. Here we recognize Ambedkar as one of our most distinguished graduates, and in some ways perhaps the most distinguished graduate. Certainly he's among the broadest and most impressive intellects to have come through the London School of Economics, polymath in the truest sense of the word. Apologies for that. Sorry, my daughter did that. He was a polymath in the truest sense of the word, which is especially impressive when one remembers what he had to overcome to obtain his education. Ambedkar is also an exemplar of what it means to put an education to good use. And the list of his accomplishments is long and inspiring. He's most well known for his intellectual and political contributions to what is today the world's largest democracy. He was, as you know, I'm sure you all know this, a member of Nehru's first cabinet, which he served as Justice Minister, and as you also know, chaired the committee that drafted the Constitution of India. I will say, as a former constitutional law professor who used to do a class on comparative constitutional law and adjudication, I can add that India has what is definitely one of the world's most interesting and fascinating constitutions. Ambedkar's constitutional legacy is particularly intriguing because he himself later became a critic of the Constitution that he played such a central role in creating. Of course, the issue closest to his heart and the one that shaped his career and has most defined his legacy was his profound commitment to advancing the rights of Dalits and other marginalized peoples. His achievements here will be the subject of much conversation during this conference. For now, or for me, suffice it to say that what he did and what he achieved place him alongside other great champions of oppressed peoples from the 20th century, including Gandhi, Mandela, and Martin Luther King. But Ambedkar was also an important economist, and he made critical and long-lasting contributions to India's economic and monetary system. In fact, his LSE thesis, The Problem of the Rupee, together with his subsequent testimony before the Royal Commission on Indian Currency and Finance, led to the establishment of the Reserve Bank of India, which I should note, since I'm happily underscoring the many connections between India and LSE, was subsequently governed by one of my predecessors and as LSE director, I.G. Patel. One other achievement that actually is often overlooked but qualifies as quite important in the eyes of this former law school dean, Ambedkar served for a time as principal of India's oldest law school, the Government of Law College in Mumbai. Okay, so that's a kind of amuse-bouche for what you'll hear and learn more about today and tomorrow as we honor the legacy of this great man. You'll hear in greater depth about the man and his philosophy as it developed from his upbringing through his time here at LSE and across his life. And you'll see, I hope and expect, how relevant his ideas and thinking remain to today's problems of social, economic, political, and legal inclusivity. I'd like to thank Dr. Ruth Katamuri for organizing today's event, as well as the LSE staff who have helped to produce it. And most of all, I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to come join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. We're glad that you were able to fit this in among your first, sort of commitments or things that you have done at the LSE as you've just joined us, but also more importantly, with your background in sustainable development, multidisciplinarity, social justice, and inclusion. We're really delighted that you could be with us here today. Thank you.
This is actually my first forum.
Yay. I think it seems very appropriate that it is your first one,
Feels that way.
and we thank you for that. I now request the Vice Chancellor of Mumbai University, Professor Kulkarni, to give his opening remarks. Over to you, sir. Can we project that, please?
Thanks, Dr. Ruth. Am I audible?
Yes.
Thanks, Honorable Professor Larry, President and Vice Chancellor of London School of Economics, the keynote speaker of the conference, Professor Nicholas, Deputy High Commissioner Sri Sujit Ghosh, Professor Baliram Gaikwad, Registrar, University of Mumbai and convener of the conference, Professor Manisha Karne, the other convener of the conference, Dr. Sunil Bare, Director General, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Research and Training Institute, Dr. Ruth, who was the main anchor and a strong support in the organization of this conference. Thanks to Dr. Ruth to begin with. And the most important, the distinguished delegates. As we are well aware, and as Dr. Ruth has repeatedly pointed out, the multidisciplinarity and versatile personality of Bharat Ratna Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. As we understand, he was a man of many talents and professions. He was a politician, jurist, economist, journalist, and the most important, social reform. He was the architect of the Constitution of India and served as the first Law and Justice Minister of independent India. While his contributions to social development and justice, as well as his contribution in framing the Constitution of sovereign India, are widely known and extensively recognized, his role as a distinguished economist is equally important and significant. Bharat Ratna Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's writings on monetary policy, public finance, public expenditure, and land holdings reveal his keen research and interest in wide-ranging policy-oriented welfare issues connected to economics. His ideas are very much relevant even today. As probably when he dealt with the problem of rupees as a part of his DSc thesis at London School of Economics, we come across many of important suggestions given by Bharat Ratna Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, which are relevant even today. One can look at the various ideas suggested by him, such as benefits of depreciation in the open economy, the need to take the distributional consequences into account, the need to maintain price stability in the domestic economy, and the preference for rules over discretion in monetary management, especially in global context. Bharat Ratna Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's significant economic contributions to India range across diverse areas such as agriculture and land reforms, industrialization and labor reforms, the economics of caste system, the women empowerment, water and power resource policies, economic planning, tax system, and such as many such multiple economic policies. He also advocated for the development of a society with a combination of modernization of the economy coupled with socio-economic development, which is inclusive for the entire sections of the society, including underprivileged sections, marginalized sections of the society. His ideas of economic development were very much inclusive, and which was stressing on the principle that without inclusiveness, there will not be sustainability in the development. Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's ideas of human rights based on the principles of freedom, equality, fraternity and justice are reflected in various policy reforms which are aimed at empowering the powerless and the socially and economically marginalized and downtrodden sections of India. As chairperson of India's constitution, the constitutional provisions made by him stressed on inclusiveness of all the sections and society of our country. This centenary celebration of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's DSc from London School of Economics offers an opportunity for academicians and policymakers to deliberate Bharat Ratna Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's significant and seminal contributions and their relevance to contemporary research and policies. At the end, I extend my sincere thanks to Honorable Vice Chancellor Professor Larry, keynote speaker Professor Nicholas, Sri Sujit Ghosh, Dr. Ruth, and all other delegates of London School of Economics who provided very sustainable support in the smooth conduct of this conference. Thanks to all of you. Thank you. Over to you, Dr.
Thank you, Professor Kulkarni. I appreciate the first collaboration we did was to organize the I.G. Patel lecture, which you were involved with in 2019, which was given by the former director of LSE, and Professor Nicholas Stern was also with us. He participated in that conference. And thank you for reaching out to us and initiating this collaboration to arrange this to remember Dr. Ambedkar for his centenary. So we thank you very much, and we look forward to your joining us tomorrow. Now, with that, I hand you over to Lord Nicholas Stern, who's the I.G. Patel Professor of Economics and Government. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ruth, and thank you to you all for coming. Thank you, Dr. Kulkarni, for your initiation and collaboration around this event, for hosting us in Mumbai for the I.G. Patel lecture, and for your very thoughtful remarks on Dr. Ambedkar's contributions. And thank you, Larry, for your first, I think, public appearance as the new president. And it's enormously significant that it's about India, because our relationship between the LSE and India goes right back to the very, very beginning. And, with the webs, and then with, more than 100 years ago now, the contributions of the Tata Foundations to our social administration school, and is a very big history which we've documented. But it goes right back to the beginning of the London School of Economics. And thank you to Ghosh for being with us today, and for essentially representing India as a whole, as Deputy High Commissioner here in London. And we've always had a very close relationship with the High Commission, which is very well placed just across the road, or I should say the LSE is very well placed just across the road from the High Commission. And thank you to all involved in putting this together. I know many people were, but if I could just recognize, celebrate again the contribution of Ruth. As they say in India, she has been the life force behind all this, with, of course, great collaboration and co-creation But Ruth, I know that this has been in your mind for around, well, at least a quarter of a century. And it's very good that it's coming to fruition this weekend. Other ways it comes to fruition, but in this way, this weekend. So thank you, Ruth. Now we're celebrating Ambedkar, Dr. Ambedkar, Babasaheb, the scholar, on the 100th anniversary of his LSE PhD. We know he had a Columbia PhD, but that of course was achieved, even though he'd been to Columbia first, it was achieved after the LSE PhD. But there are not many people where you can say his first PhD was from the London School of Economics. Well, his first PhD was from the London School of Economics. And he was a deep, deep scholar. But as we've already been hearing, this was scholarship, excuse me, this was scholarship interwoven with action and ideas for change, engagement, impact. This was everything about who he was as a person, but the deep foundations in scholarship were absolutely fundamental, and that's what he lived. We've heard, of course, we celebrate him as the father of the Constitution. That's based in many ways on scholarship. And the erudition and the commitment to scholarship is illustrated by just a few statistics which were dug up by Columbia at some point. They, looking at the records, found that he'd taken, Dr. Ambedkar, 29 courses in economics, 11, this is at Columbia, that's LSE on top of that, but 29 courses in economics at Columbia, 11 in history, 6 in sociology, 5 in philosophy, 4 in anthropology, 3 in politics, and 1 course each in French and German. That's some person, right? That is a real student. And probably the LSE records aren't good enough to tell us how many courses he went to here, but they must have been many, many more. And of course, all this founded in his personal experience of having to overcome the difficulty of his Dalit background in India to get anywhere at all. And that is extraordinarily remarkable. Now, I want to pick up, because this is about Dr. Ambedkar, the scholar, I want to pick up on 3 or 4 areas of scholarship where his contribution was remarkable. The first is the economic aspects of the Constitution, fiscal federalism, revenue bases, and the autonomy of institutions. In fact, his Columbia PhD of 2027 was entitled The Evolution of Provincial Finance in British India, subtitle, A Study in the Provincial Decentralization of Imperial Finance. Okay? So it was the multi-level finance challenges which so many economies face, and he was looking at that 100 years ago with real insight in terms of political structures, financial structures, real insight in terms of economic history, and of course making the strong distinction between the imperial finance and the subsequent federal finance. And those insights were brought into the Indian Constitution, and the Indian Constitution created the Finance Commission. It did not create the Planning Commission. Nehru created the Planning Commission, but the Indian Constitution created the Finance Commission because it was right from the beginning putting at center stage in a very large federal country like India the crucial financial relationships between the center and the states, and the importance of a revenue base, the importance of autonomy of those of the state level and indeed lower level entities, autonomy over their own revenue raising. And that is a challenge and a difficulty which I have to say in the UK we treat rather badly, but it is something that runs across all sizable countries. And there he was 100 years ago with all these sort of intellectual marshalling of the issues, backed by a deep understanding of an economic history and by the contrasting politics between the imperial finance and subsequently the federal finance. Just an extraordinary, extraordinary mind. The second area was already touched on, of course, extremely important, was the notion of human rights and the right to shape your own destiny. And that is there in 18th century European and indeed United States philosophy, I mean in the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty and the pursuit of happiness, it's about your ability to shape your own future. And that was where he started from, with the idea of human rights. Now, of course, it was very much alive and articulated in the 18th century in Europe and then the United States, because it goes back much further than that. You know, you can trace it back to the great documents of the big religions, including, of course, Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, and so on, but also to the Greek philosophers. But it's an idea of the ability to shape your own life, which for many of us lies at the heart of what we mean by human rights. His work on the Hindu Code Bill, defining rights of women around widow remarriage, dowry, abortion, the right to choose who to marry. This was, after independence, his great enthusiasm, but again based on a very clear underlying philosophical, very structured, organized mind that he displayed in everything he did. He did this, and it's this, by the way, that made me absolutely convinced that if he were with us today, he would be at the forefront of campaigning for sustainability. Why? Because sustainability is the right to future generations to have the opportunities that this generation had. That's what we mean by sustainability. It's the right to development. And when the rich countries have emitted so much by getting rich in a dirty way in the past, they infringe the rights of development of poorer countries today. We all infringe the rights to development of future generations by damaging the physical environment in which they live. It's a human rights issue, and it's that convinces me that had Dr. Ambedkar been with us, he would have been up there in the front of this story, because it's a human rights story in so many ways. Of course, he as well as the grand stuff about constitutions, fiscal federalism, and I'll come to the rupee in a moment, he was really also very thoughtful micro-economist, and he wrote about, very, very early about underemployment in Indian agriculture, some of it arising from the size of the small holdings and so on. And that resonates very closely to me personally, because I've been working in one village in Moradabad district of UP now for 50 years. I first went there in the summer of 74, and you can see, you know, we stand on the shoulders of giants, and this was a giant who understood the great sweeps of imperial history, along with the real micro of what's it like to try to make a living in rural India. On the rupee, and the thesis here at the LSE, again, he was way, way ahead of his time. The Brits, he argued, I think convincingly, were overvaluing the rupee in order to make it more competitive for UK firms to sell their products in India, and make it more difficult for Indian firms to sell their product outside. And he was right. But he also saw immediately that competitiveness is about real wages. So if you devalue the rupee, you lower the real wage in India, and you make it more competitive. But of course, part of the problem's in that sentence. You lower the real wage in India. So that means that there's some lowering of living standards. So you've got this challenge for policy. You want to be competitive, but you also want to maintain the living standards. Exactly the kind of story that much later economists, way after the Second World War, like Harry Johnson, were telling this story. And as Vice Chancellor Kulkarni has already said, he brought into it also the institutional side, which is how far do you have rules to stop, as it were, the Minister of Finance of the day or Central Bank Governor of the day just fiddling around and changing at any notice, and how far do you have discretion? So the rules that he was emphasizing, the rule associated with the gold standard, would actually reduce the amount of discretion that the short-term policymakers might. So it was all wonderful stuff. I also think that his idea, basic idea of human rights and the right to shape your own life, and here we speculate a little bit, but I think he would have stood against identity politics. Why? Because he was arguing right constantly throughout his career that you respect people for their ideas, you respect people for their contribution to society. You respect people for the moral values that they uphold and exhibit. That's where respect should come from, not from some notion of identity, which family they come from, and so on. And again, this is an example of somebody who I think is just remarkably modern, or in a sense, that's perhaps the wrong way to put it. He is for all time. He is for all time because he's really bringing to the fore these fundamental ideas and truths and rigor in his logic. So, like many of you, you have to be careful. You can get carried away on Ambedkar. I better accelerate just a little bit. But I reread one or two pieces by a former professor here and well known to many of you, Ram Guha, where he was comparing if you like, some great works and some great people in terms of their contribution. And he contrasted Gandhiji's Hind Swaraj from 1909, Tagore's nationalism, that's 1917, Nehru's discovery of India, 1946, of course written whilst he was incarcerated by the Brits, and the annihilation of caste by Dr. Ambedkar. And those, of course, enormously different pieces of work. And what Tagore says on nationalism, I think, is very important reading today in terms of the dangers of nationalism and what it can carry with it. And of course, Gandhiji's Hind Swaraj, they're all very powerful, important books. But what Ram was saying about Dr. Ambedkar's Annihilation of Caste is not simply a fantastically important book in terms of what it says about identity and caste and values and so on, and contemporary India then. It is also very well organized intellectually. And he contrasts that with the other books, which of course have their great powers and distinctions, but he emphasizes very strongly how academically rigorous and analytical everything that Dr. Ambedkar wrote was. So when we think of his great mind, we also have to think of his great person. We also have to think of his great writing in this sort of analytical sort of rigor sense. And he was, again, as Ram points out, he was a hero and remains a hero to the whole of India. There's some Indian heroes who are particularly heroes in bits of India. Sardar Patel, a great man, very important in Indian history, but particularly celebrated in Gujarat. And you've got Subhash Chandra Bose, of course, again, a very significant India, but particularly celebrated in Bengal, I mean, West and East. And, but here was Dr. Ambedkar right across. It's wherever you are in India, you see the celebration of him. And also, he carried, and it's very important that, actually, I'm not usually in suit and tie, particularly not on a Saturday morning, but I actually wore a suit and tie today because the last 30 years of his life, Dr. Ambedkar wore a suit and tie. And what was he doing? Because he's a very thoughtful, as well as, but we're celebrating scholar, but there's also politics in this. He essentially was asserting that he was a qualified 2 PhD lawyer here in London in this area of London, and he was professionally qualified. He'd done his bit, and it was a significant statement, not simply about the professional qualification, but I think also about social mobility. So for him, wearing a suit was not only signifying how far he had come, but also actually emphasizing that this is a feature of social mobility that matters to everybody. Very distinct from the message that Gandhiji was sending when, in his dress, he, again, you know, the arch political figure, one of the most impressive political figures of all time, arguably. But he was sending a message of affirmation of the India that he knew and a rejection of the imperial controlling. But very interestingly, Dr. Ambedkar, with his suit and tie, was making a similar statement, a similarly political statement, but a very different political statement, and his was about social mobility. Let me just say one final thing on the intellectual side, because it shows the breadth that he was of this extraordinary person's intellect. He was contrasting those who just speak, or particularly speak about political reform, and those who politically speak about economic reform, with what we should be speaking about, which is political, economic, and social reform. And so he was attacking those who, in the name of democracy, were emphasizing political reform, sometimes in opposition to social reform. He said, well, what does political reform and democracy mean if very large fractions of our population are excluded and humiliated and prevented in many ways from exercising those? He said, you cannot sensibly separate political, social reform. And he also, remember the time he was writing, he was also trying to show that the very narrow Marxist economic property-based notions of power were also insufficient. Not that they were irrelevant, but they were insufficient. And so he's saying, look, how can you say that all power comes from property? Just look at where we are. Look at the power of the priesthood and indeed the astrologers and so on. So again saying, you might say it's all about economic reform, you're wrong. You might say it's all about political reform, you're wrong. But if you put all three together, you have something which is enormously powerful. And so there he is, Babasaheb, Ambedkar, intellectual, social, and political hero, a hero for the world, not just for India. The power of his mind, the depth of his sense of justice, together with a deep understanding of law, of constitutions, of economics, social sciences in general, was absolutely extraordinary. We're very privileged that he chose to spend time with us and to think and write at the LSE. And we're extraordinarily proud and very fortunate to count him as an alumnus. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. As many of us will know, Nick is a friend of India. And when he was first made Lord, there was all this talk when we went to India for some events. People started asking, will he choose to be called Lord Stern of Palanpur? So that's the village that he talked about. So thank you, Nick. And beyond that, for me personally, he's my philosopher, guide, and friend for several years, and that's valuable to me. Let me add a couple of things to what Nick was talking about, Ambedkar, and how the relevance of his sustainability of his work. So after he did his PhD, he continued his work. He participated in the Hilton Young Commission, in the Royal Commission on Indian Currency and Finance in London in 1926, and he provided comments and inputs that led to the creation of the Reserve Bank of India, which of course is a partner in our I.G. Patel chair. And in terms of his thought leadership, I'll just classify it into 4 topics. One is inclusive development, where he was an advocate of a mixed economy with a belief in economic planning for holistic and inclusive development. He worked on human capital development. He championed education, social protection, and labor rights to further economic and social empowerment. He was responsible for structural change and industrialization. He recognized the importance of industrialization in growing the Indian economy and reducing dependence on agriculture, and also global trade. He supported international trade in a global economy to be equitable and sustainable. And we heard Nick give certain clarifications of these areas as well. And we really, and we like to believe that the time he spent at LSE was valuable to him as well, and he took the learning with him throughout his life. He joined the bar when he was here. He probably would have been quite actively aware or learning or understanding of the suffragist movement, and LSE Library has one of the best collections on that, because he also worked for equality of women way back in the 1920s. So we like to think that he valued his presence or his time at LSE, and that LSE has contributed to his own, his contributions to India and the world. But at the same time, I think he continues to contribute to the LSE through his legacy. The fact that we have all of you here who've come, particularly because I know from all the work we've been doing how much all of you value to want to come and to have come here. And also this year particularly, I know there are other people trying to organize events at the LSE. It's almost like LSE has become a pilgrimage site for people who want to celebrate Ambedkar in this particular year. So thank you all for being here, and thanks, Meghnad. Okay, we hear some Marathi also, which is nice. It brings the flavor of Mumbai into this room. So with that now, the final speaker for us is Mr. Sujit Ghosh, the Deputy High Commissioner. For us, as all of you have been hearing, we're just down the road. It's been a close partnership, and I hope closer than all the other universities, Mr. Ghosh. But so we thank you for being here with us today to represent the High Commission, and I believe this is a collaborative exercise to celebrate Dr. Ambedkar in partnership with the High Commission as well. So over to you, sir.
Thank you. Good morning, President and Vice Chancellor of LSE, Mr. Larry Kramer. Good morning, Lord Stern. Good morning, Vice Chancellor Kulkarni, and good morning to all of you. I'm delighted to be here at the LSE this morning, and I would like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to present my thoughts on the contributions made by Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar to India's state and nation building. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's multifaceted brilliance encompassed roles as a political leader, jurist, economist, and social reformer. I would agree with the organizers of this conference that Dr. Ambedkar's scholarship in the field of economics deserves more attention of the academia and policymakers. And it is here that I would urge all of you, policymakers and members from the academia, to delve deeper into Dr. Ambedkar's works and contributions in the field of economics in the next 2 days that you are here. I believe, and as all the four speakers before me, they underlined, Dr. Ambedkar's scholarship continues to be relevant in addressing some of the key challenges that the world is grappling with in this day and age. As we all know, Dr. Ambedkar, as India's first law minister, played a pivotal role in shaping legislation aimed at addressing societal inequalities and promoting social justice. He proposed a leading role for the state in economic life without closing avenues to private enterprise. He dedicated his life to eradicating social discrimination and championing the rights of women and the oppressed. In his work titled Annihilation of Caste, published in 1937, Dr. Ambedkar noted how the system of social stratification, among other things, was hindering mobility of labor and capital. He was of the view that agriculture in India requires constant modernization to guarantee food security. At the same time, ensuring that agriculture generates adequate returns to those who are dependent on it was very important for him. As Lord Stern said, he was in favor of consolidation of land holdings. In his paper on small holdings in India and their remedies, he suggested state-owned cooperative farming and industrialization to tackle unemployment. He viewed industrialization as a means of increasing agricultural productivity and capital goods production, which in turn could help reduce poverty and inequality. Lord Stern also spoke about his book, The Problem of the Rupee, Its Origin and Its Solution. He argued in favor of a gold standard over gold exchange standard. This entire debate eventually led to the setting up of the Reserve Bank of India. In his book on the evolution of provincial finance in British India, he summarized the history of the financial relationship between the provinces and the government of India pre-1947. This book details his data analysis from 1833 to 1871 that showed a defective fiscal system with destructive taxes and where government expenditure was unproductive. He was in favor of a qualitative analysis of public expenditure and not just a quantitative one. I gained from Lord Stern's masterclass. I was not aware that it was Dr. Ambedkar who was instrumental in getting the Finance Commission, which, if my memory serves me right, is Article 280 of the Indian Constitution. I may be wrong. Was part he made it a part of the Constitution and not the Planning Commission. So thank you, Professor, for that. Dr. Ambedkar also made several contributions as a Minister of Public Works during 1942 to 46, including the first multi-purpose river valley project, the Damodar Valley project. He was one of the first to propose the interlinking of Indian rivers. His ideas have informed GOI policies, including flagship programs from Jan Dhan to Mudra and beyond, aimed at prioritizing vulnerable and marginalized segments. To realize the vision of industrialization set forth by Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, GOI has implemented a series of significant reforms aimed at enhancing the Make in India initiative. These reforms include substantial reductions in corporate taxes and overhauling labor laws. Make in India aligns with Dr. Ambedkar's vision of India as a manufacturing powerhouse. Similarly, programs like Startup India and Stand Up India underline Dr. Ambedkar's unwavering belief in self-reliance. Dr. Ambedkar underlined the need for infrastructure growth, which was deeply rooted in his conviction regarding India's need for industrialization. The current government has invested massively in creating infrastructure, including power, roads, railways, ports, and air connectivity. Notably, initiatives like Saubhagya have guaranteed electricity access to underprivileged households. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was determined to ensure access of water for all. Schemes like Jal Jeevan Mission have provided tap water connections to millions of rural households in India. Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's vision of providing education to the most underprivileged has inspired the introduction of the NEP 2020. In conclusion, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's contributions have had a major influence in shaping of India's socio-economic and political milieus. GOI is committed to ensuring that his timeless wisdom remains a guiding light for generations to come. I wish the conference all success. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ghosh. So I think we'll conclude this session now, and thanks to all of you for coming here. And I don't think we're taking any questions, I'm afraid. So thank you all for. Sorry? We can talk about it later. So firstly, thank you all for being here. I was worried as to will we have 200 people or 10 people. So I'm pleased to see that we have a significant group of you here, and we look forward to the Vice Chancellor joining us. So thanks to all the speakers on a Saturday morning to make the time. And I also want to thank others who helped in organizing this. Manisha, who the Vice Chancellor already thanked, but I'm really sorry that she couldn't be here with us, but I hope she's joined us online. And we have some others here. We have Baliram, who's the registrar from the university, and Sulan Vare, who are here in the room, who've been able to reach here in time to be with us today. And I also want to thank my team, Shantanu Singh Niyati, who's here as a Ratan Tata visiting fellow, and she's had extra responsibilities than any other fellow before her, and Manas, and the Inequalities Institute's team, as well as Larry's team in his office. So thank you all once again, and we look forward to continuing these conversations over the next few days. Thank you.